Welcome everyone to our webinar for the Academic Society on the topic of teaching transversal skills to our engineering students. We have 4 speakers lined up for you this morning, and they're all going to approach this topic from a different angle, from the industry approach, from the academic approach, and from an overarching approach as to why it's so important for graduates. Before we get started, our first speaker, I'd like to introduce you to Kevin Delaney, who's the chair of the Academic Society.
Welcome, everyone. It's great to see so many people online for this webinar today. As Anne said, I'm Kevin Delaney, and I'm the chair of the Academic Society of Engineers Ireland for this academic year. Engineers Ireland is the voice of the engineering profession in Ireland since 1835, and it has over 25,000 members. The members come from all disciplines of engineering and include student members, chartered members, and fellows of the profession. The Academic Society is one of many networking groups within Engineers Ireland, and it organises a series of events, typically webinars like this one, throughout the academic year. It's open to engineers and non-engineers, members and non-members of Engineers Ireland. We have members from all the universities, technological institutes and institutes of technology, and are always open to suggestions for future webinars, topics of relevance to engineering educators. This webinar, the second in our series of webinars for this academic year, is titled Teaching Transversal Skills to Our Engineering Students. What are they? How should we teach them? How should we assess them? As engineering educators, we must all consider how we can help prepare our students to maximize their potential when they embark on their careers in industry. To be really effective engineers, they must be able to do a lot more than do the sums to solve problems. They have to develop and use their transversal skills. It's particularly relevant for all of us when going through the accreditation process for our courses within Engineers Ireland. Our event today is supported by the Enterprise Academy in TU Dublin. This is part of a joint human capital initiative project between UCD and TU Dublin to foster engagement between the universities and enterprise. As part of Kieran's talk later, we'll hear about some of the work he is leading in DCU through another human capital initiative project. I hope that you will find the presentations useful, and please let us know if you are interested in becoming more involved with the Academic Society. And with that, I will hand back to Anne.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kevin. I'd like now to introduce our first speaker, Majella Henshin. Majella is the Technical Capability Manager for the ESB, and she's a mechanical engineer by qualification, graduating from UCD in 1990, and started working in the generation end of the ESB that same year. And she's worked across a wide variety of roles in technical, managerial, and strategic roles across the ESB in the last 33 years. She holds a master's in maintenance management from Manchester University and is a chartered engineer and fellow of Engineers Ireland. As Technical Capability Manager, Majella is responsible for technical graduate recruitment and development. She is also responsible for strategic planning in relation to the future technical capabilities required to deliver ESB's net zero by 2040 strategy. Over to you, Majella.
Good morning, everybody. Hopefully my slides are now sharing. So yes, look, I always sound better in bio than I really am, but hopefully I can live up to it. And look, one of the main reasons I'm here talking to you is on the basis that I recruit a lot of your graduates, and I'm in the process of doing it right now. So, behaviours, that's what transversal skills are. And the way we look at it is that they can broadly be grouped into ways of thinking, ways of acting, ways of learning, and ways of interacting. And because of where we find ourselves, we need people with these skills. So why exactly is it important? Well, look, they matter because they're what allow us to turn our technical knowledge and competence into suitable outputs. What I mean by that is, if you take all your book learning and you become a mechanical engineer like me with an interest in working in the automotive industry, which I didn't go into, when you're asked to solve the problem of, hey, I need a way to get around town, I need some transport, you can design a fabulous car. But if you add in transversal skills and you're saying you need transport, you look at all the options and you ask a lot of questions, you work with other people, you look at the financial side, you look at a whole load of different sides. And then you learn that actually I'm an impoverished student who's time rich, cash poor, And what I want is a bicycle, not a Ferrari. I'd love the Ferrari, but it's not going to get me around the way I want it. That's effectively for us what transversal skills are about. It's about taking that book learning and using all those necessary things to actually produce the output that we need, rather than the output that you'd love to produce. So overall, when we're recruiting, what are employers looking for? We're looking for technical skills and knowledge, which is the qualifications that you guys make sure that they all have. Then we're looking for the right motivation as well. So I've put the net zero sort of bubble up there because in ESB, that's what we're driven to do. Our strategy is to be at net zero by 2040. And we need that the people who join us are committed to that and are going to work with us on that. And then we need the behaviors, the transversal skills. We need people who are going to be able to do teamwork, to communicate, to have good decision making, to take commercial into account as well as technical, and all of those other transversal skills. So when we're looking for people, where do we look for those transversal skills? Well, yes, there's the formal education piece, and we're going to focus on that to a large extent today. But we also recognize that these skills come from all parts of your life. And what that means for us is that we want students to recognize that they're learning every minute of every day, whether they like it or not, even when they're out with their friends, doing their sports, being parts of a club, even doing the housework and the DIY. So again, we know that we're not going to have people who are expert in everything. And certainly when it comes to transversal skills, I wouldn't expect anyone to believe they're at mastery, because you can always learn more. So again, what are we looking for? We don't want to be taking people who are unconsciously incompetent, total novices who don't actually recognize that they need these skills. But once they're somewhere in the advanced beginner to proficient level, then we know we can work with them, we can help develop them further, and we can help move them on. So we need them to be at least consciously incompetent, ideally consciously competent, and working on their way towards being experts in those skills in the same way as they're working on their way to be expert technically. And how do you do that? Well, when it comes to your technical skills and qualifications, yes, it's great. You can get your diploma or your report card. When it comes to proficiency in sports, you can get the medals. But when it comes to these transversal skills, what I've learned over my many years is that the way you know you've got them is by reflecting on what you've done and looking at where they're at, and then being able to tell the stories that actually enable people to see that, yes, indeed, you have them. And why we use stories is because that way you're talking about something that really happened, and it can be authentic. It's quite, well, it's not that people can't lie and do it convincingly, but most of the time when you ask people to tell you a story about how they demonstrated a behavior in the past, you get to see their real skill set. And what we look for them to do is to tell that story using the STAR method, where they outline the situation, the task that they were undertaking, all the actions that they did, and what the result of that was. And by the way, we're happy for the result to be, it didn't go brilliantly, but I learned this. And the next time I was doing a project like this, it went better. So, so basically, that's what we're looking for. And we see those transversal skills as being the things that connect them from their technical excellence to being output driven and people who actually can help us to get the job done. So I have my question symbol, but that's all waiting till the end. So I'm going to actually leave it at that.
Our next speaker is Kieran Dunn from DCU. I know Kieran I'm in DCU as well, so I know Kieran well. And I'm very involved in is what he's going to talk about today with our Futures programme. Kieran is the first Transversal Skills Director for Dublin City University, a unique role in higher education internationally, which focuses on empowering students and graduates to thrive in an increasingly unscripted world through the development, application and evidencing of a variety of key transversal skills. Prior to taking on this role and following on from his experience working in both the public and private sector, Kieran was Associate Professor in DCU, lecturing across multiple disciplines, including sociology, social entrepreneurship, innovation, creativity, and creative thinking, futures literacy, intercultural studies, and Spanish language. He is passionate about creativity, and his Talking Creativity podcast explores how this innate human capacity can be cultivated both individually and collectively. Over to you, Kieran.
I am. Thank you very much. That's I was tired listening about myself there. Anyway, thanks for having me today. As Anne was saying, my role in DCU, it's a new role insofar as, well, I'm in it around 2.5 years now, but it's a brand new role, position that was created as Transversal Skills Director, which is a bit of a mouthful, but basically my job is to identify what transversal skills students should have, and then figure out how we can integrate them into programs, and how we can, crucially, how we can evaluate them and evidence them. And in many ways, I think what I'm going to talk about, connects well with Majella's point around the importance that students have a language and ability to articulate how they have developed their transversal skills and how they've applied them. But I wanted to start just at a bit of a more macro perspective, because like what we're doing, and any institution who's like really committing to transversal skills, it requires quite a bit of heavy lifting. And so when you're asking people to change, it's important that you have a compelling rationale for why you're doing that. And so just at a macro level, I think, first of all, particularly those of us who are working in higher education, we need to be very aware that there are major forces that are beginning to really shape the higher industry or higher education sector as a whole. And they go way beyond one single institution. So for example, the idea of diversification. So there's more organizations getting involved in higher education that have no history in the sector, like Udemy, LinkedIn, Coursera, Meta, Alphabet, etc. So these have the ability to disrupt the higher education sector. So for us as HEIs, we have to ask ourselves, what is unique about what we're doing compared to these other organizations? Then, of course, we know that COVID just accelerated the shift towards digitalization. And we're very aware that, when we started to reopen after COVID internationally, a lot of students just didn't come back to campus. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the value of having in-person learning? What is unique to that? What is the additional benefit that students can accrue from actually coming onto campus? The next major trend is around personalization. So what I mean by that is historically, higher education hasn't necessarily recognized the diversity of the student body, or the student body hasn't been particularly diverse, but that is definitely changing in recent times and will continue to do so. And part of that is driven, whether we like it or not, by the commodification, the commercialization of higher education, the idea that students are demanding certain things. But apart from that as well, we have more diverse demographics. And we need to recognize that not everyone learns the way we learned. And so we need to diversify our modalities of teaching and learning, and indeed assessment. And then I think the next two are really important points. So the next one is, again, like, we are all passionate about the different domains and disciplines that we work in, and we see the huge value of knowledge, but we equally have to recognize that in relative terms, the value of knowledge is depreciating. So what I mean by that is, first of all, the half-life of knowledge is reducing all the time, driven by exponential technological growth. So there's a huge amount of change. But also the recognition that, once this person has access to the internet, they can access a colossal amount of knowledge and information in real time from anywhere in the world, which they couldn't have done 20 years ago. And so we have to ask ourselves as educators, what do we need to do to go beyond knowledge? And I think, again, Majella, and I think Kevin will talk about this, is the application of our knowledge. It's not to say that knowledge isn't important, but it's about what we do with it. And the skills can help us with that. And then, of course, the big thing at the moment and in the future, I think, will be AI, the impact of AI on higher education, the learning journeys of individuals. And we're right at just the tip of the AI iceberg. How is it going to impact higher education? And then finally, there's a big push now, we're going to see it increasingly, towards cultivating cultures of lifelong learning in education. The OECD report on our national skills strategy back in May, like the document screams out about lifelong learning. Actually, there's almost no mention of undergraduate education. It's all around the importance of lifelong learning. So again, as higher education institutions, we need to be aware of what's all these forces at play. And so one of the questions that emerges, how can we make sure that we are relevant, that we're impactful, that we're sustainable? And so one of the mechanisms for this is for us to invest in transversal skills for different reasons apart from that. So also we need to recognize that graduates are changing career more often than ever before. So they're moving from one sector to another sector to another sector horizontally. And so while it makes sense that they would have a vertical expertise, it also makes sense increasingly that they would have skills that they can bring with them in a horizontal way across sectors. Also, I mean, there's so many different reports done nationally and internationally around skills gaps, whether it's the World Economic Forum, the OECD, the EU, IBEC, talking about the need for graduates to have specific skills that industry is screaming out for them. I'm sure Majella can speak to that as well. And as part of that, what we've seen is a notable shift towards a skills-first recruitment strategy by industry. So that means that industry they care about what qualification a student has, but they're increasingly concerned with what skills the students have and how the student can actually demonstrate and evidence those skills, which links with Najella's point around the storytelling. And as well as that, I think we live in this connected, globalized world. Arguably, there's a shift towards deglobalization, but certainly we're all connected. And so the challenges and indeed the opportunities we face are increasingly complex. They require multiple different stakeholders. And so things like communication, leadership, ethical decision-making, intercultural competence, etc., they become increasingly important in order to maximize the potential of opportunities and to overcome the challenges that we face. And as I mentioned already, from a graduate perspective, these transversal skills that we're talking about, and I'll show our DCU ones shortly, they are fundamentally human in nature. They can't be replicated by AI at this point in time, at least. It doesn't mean we can't leverage the affordances of technology to develop these skills and to evidence these skills and to apply these skills, but they are fundamentally human in nature. And I should say, the term transversal skills doesn't roll off your tongue. Some people call it transferable skills, 21st century skills, meta skills, power skills is the term used by the Project Management Institute. But the only term that I absolutely am allergic to is soft skills, because soft, it has all these negative connotations that undervalues and devalues the huge importance that these skills play. Because if we look around the world, we see that a lot of the challenges that we face do not come from a lack of knowledge. They come from a breakdown in transversal skills, a lack of critical thinking, a lack of creative thinking, a lack of leadership, a lack of teamwork and collaboration, a lack of project management, etc., etc. So that's really important. So the logic is that, in this world of increasing uncertainty influenced by AI, if we can ensure that our students and our graduates have these transversal skills, essentially what we're giving them is higher levels of personal agency so that they can navigate an increasingly unscripted, unpredictable, and complex world. And I use the idea of thriving, that we want our students to be able to thrive. And when they thrive, they can impact industry in a positive way as well. But so my understanding of thriving is that a student has the ability to imagine, to pursue, and to realize a life that they have reason to value and that is of value to their society. And then, as I mentioned already, if an institution focuses and invests in these transversal skills, it enhances the institution's relevance, their impact, and their sustainability within the context of lots of different disruption. So as regards DCU, we have, my job has been to identify our transversal skills. There is no set list of transversal skills. Every organization can come up with their own list of transversal skills, and that's absolutely fine. So we've committed to these, but that doesn't mean this is the definite list that everyone should subscribe to. But essentially it falls under 4 headings, which broadly speaking are very similar to Magella's headings. So ways of thinking, ways of working, tools to working, and tools for thriving. And you can see them there. So they're quite broad. It's very ambitious. They're very holistic. Certainly, I would come at skills from a very holistic perspective and using the idea of human capabilities. So it isn't just skills, it's all about personal development as well. So you see things like career visioning and health literacy in there also, because it's important that graduates pursue careers that are calibrated, are congruent with their personal values. And as well as that, we know, in terms of employees and students, they perform best when they're in a healthy place, when they're a good place, when they're looking after their well-being. So that's why those transversal skills are there. But as I mentioned already, committing to transversal skills is not easy. It requires some heavy lifting, and certainly, Anne and other colleagues in DCU, they have felt the challenge of what I've asked and the team that I'm involved in are asking them to do around transversal skills. And I'm very aware of that and appreciative of the effort that people are making. But some of the heavy lifting, number one, be very clear about how you define these skills. So what exactly does creative thinking or critical thinking mean to your organization? And that should be really explicitly articulated and visible across the organization or within the learning environment. Because there's no set definition of any of these transversal skills. They are subjective, kind of slippery concepts. And not just how you define them, how you operationalize them. So creative thinking is X, Y, and Z, but someone who is a creative thinker can do A, B, C, and D. And that's how we operationalize it through competence statements. And then the next thing is, how can you actually cultivate and stimulate the development of these transversal skills? Because you're going to need more innovative modalities for teaching and learning. The old model of just talking at students certainly won't work. It needs to be experiential and immersive. And then how do you integrate these skills into programs in a flexible way? Because, many programs, and particularly engineering, it's extremely dense. There's a huge amount of information that students have to, and knowledge that students have to require. So how can you integrate the transversal skills in an authentic way into that, while respecting the academic freedom of the academics, but also recognizing that if we want all of our students to develop these skills, there needs to be some level of consistency or some level of standardization across the institution. And certainly a huge concern that we've come across from colleagues as we've tried to roll out this project is the concern of cannibalizing discipline-specific curricula. The idea that, yes, I'm all in favor of sustainability, literacy, and entrepreneurship, but our curriculum is chock-a-block already. How do we possibly put this in without losing something else? And I think a big challenge for us is to manage that polarity and to challenge that the mindset that it's one or the other in a respectful and honest and open way. Because unless you do that, you won't get buy-in from staff. And this stuff requires buy-in from all staff, not just academics, from admin staff, from professional services. For example, what we're trying to do in DCU, or what we are doing in DCU, is for the first time ever, students will graduate with their degree transcript in sustainable engineering or mechatronic engineering, whatever the case is, accounting and finance, etc. But they will also graduate with the fully personalized transversal skills profile that's unique to them. And that crucially, their level of competence in these transversal skills will have been formally assessed within the program structures. And that's quite unique because a lot of people self-report on their transversal skills. And actually, there's a lot of value in that. And certainly Magella talked about the importance of telling your story. However, a lot of employers are saying, that graduates are coming in saying that they're excellent at communication, they're excellent at teamwork, they're excellent at leadership, they're excellent at creative thinking. But ultimately, it's others who decide that. So what we're trying to do is weave the development and the assessment of these skills into the fabric of undergraduate programs. And as well as that, we really have to convince the students that this stuff is important. Students see the world through the lens of of courses. Their CEO program is all, or CEO forms are all about courses. And we're kind of saying to them, you know, yes, your course is really important and you should definitely study what you're passionate about and commit to it. But these skills are extremely important as well. So we have to capture their minds and convince them as well. And that, again, we have to collaborate internally, external stakeholders. We do a lot of work at industry, listening to people like Majella around what transversal skills are important to them, getting them involved in the development of programs, the assessment of our students. Obviously, work placement is a fantastic vehicle through which students can both develop their skills and apply them and refine them. And look, a major thing is, right, how do we actually evaluate transversal skills? How do we evaluate if someone is a creative thinker? How do we evaluate if someone is personally agile? These are huge challenges from a teaching and learning and assessment perspective. And then how do we evidence those things? And I know Kevin will talk about this, but you know, very quickly, we've identified 4 kind of strategies for transversal skills. Number 1, you make them extracurricular outside the program structures. That's all well and good, but if they're all extracurricular, no one's going to do it. Number 2, you develop dedicated 5-credit modules or 10-credit modules on a given transversal skill. Look, in an ideal world, that'd be brilliant. But as I said, the risk then is you're cannibalizing the program content. You have external accreditation, like in the case of engineers. And so realistically, we're not going to get 30 or 40 credits from any given program to develop these modules. The third approach then is embedding. So let's say in physics, we want them to develop intercultural competence. You know, no offense to physicists, but there may not be experts in intercultural competence within physics. And so the idea is that you create centralized content and then you work with the physics team to identify where that content might fit within the program. So the module coordinator doesn't necessarily have to be an expert in intercultural competence, but they do need to be able to identify where that content would most congruently and logically fit in, where there's a kind of an appropriate aperture for them in the program. And then finally, the really, really important one where it all starts is this idea of surfacing. Because we don't want to say that that transversal skills have not been part of higher education for decades or longer. They absolutely have. Critical thinking, etc. It's all central to higher education. So by surfacing, we mean that we're giving programs the opportunity to show us to what extent they're already doing these things. Because if they're already doing them, cultivating them and assessing them, then we don't need to create this centralized content, and we don't need the dedicated 5-credit modules, and we don't need necessarily the extracurricular offerings either. So that surfacing piece is incredibly important, and that requires basically mapping of the program structures and the modules. So look, there's a lot. I went through that quite quickly, and I'm happy to take Q&A at the end, but just some final reflections. As I mentioned, so transversal skills are not new to higher education. However, I mean, I do this on a day-to-day basis. Even since I started 2.5 years ago, there's been a huge shift in the narrative around transversal skills, in the importance around transversal skills, in the use of the term transversal skills. So they're no longer a nice to have, they're a must have for students, and employers are screaming out for them. And doing them in a really authentic way, in a way that can be scaled across an institution, not just a program, requires a lot of resources and buy-in. So financial resources, time resources, you know, staff really engaging with that process. And that's why it's important to be able to articulate why this is so important to students and to the institution and to the economy and society indeed as well. And as I touched on this already, a big challenge for transversal skills is trying to manage that tension between, you know, if I bring in a transversal skill, do I have to get rid of something else? And certainly I would say the answer to that is no, but that doesn't mean it's easy. So we have to be creative and innovative in how we do that. And certainly surfacing what people have been doing for many, many years is a really important stage in that process. So look, I'm going to stop talking there. I think it was about 15 minutes or so, but I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end of the other presentation. So thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Kieran. A very stimulating talk, and I'm sure we'll have some questions after the session. Our next speaker is Professor Colin Turner from Colin is the Pro Vice Chancellor and Executive Dean for the Faculty of Computing, Engineering and the Built Environment at the University of Ulster. Colin has a BSc and PhD degrees in mathematics from Queen's University Belfast, and among his many honours and awards, Colin is a National Teaching Fellow and both a Chartered Engineer and a Chartered Mathematician. He is a board member and director of the Engineering Professors Council, and his areas of teaching expertise are in maths, software development, and how these relate to engineering. Colin's keen interest in enabling students to lead their own societies and other initiatives are an example of what will be showcased in his talk today. Over to you, Colin.
So folks, just before I start, I'm going to thank Michael Jennings, who's a former PhD student of mine, because I've stolen some of his slides completely intentionally, because this is really a talk about student-led activities, and some of these are slides that MJ or Michael Jennings has done with me in the past. So hence you'll see some of his slides in here, and I'll try to talk to those on the way through. Hang on, get the right window. There we go. When I first started this, this working title of Teaching Transversal Skills Through On-Campus Extracurricular Activities was proposed. But actually, when I started to really put the slides together, I realized that the title is not really correct. It's more about facilitating the learning of those transversal activities. So in retrospect, that would be a better title. And I think actually you could add co-curricular to that extracurricular. So first of all, a little bit about the what and a little bit about what we did. I was trying to reboot a student society within the School of Engineering at Ulster University at the time. And I'd struggled to do that a bit. And I had said to folks that if we could do this with one society across the whole school, I'd be able to resource it properly. And I know that a lot of the students were skeptical about that. But I struck gold in one particular year in that we managed to get a few people that were prepared to do that. I've often referred to them as the Three Musketeers, and I circled them here amongst this fine group of people. So they together sort of co-founded Ulster Society of Student Engineers, and were in my office pretty much daily with some of their ideas. And in particular, they approached me with some ideas that they would like to do a couple of activities at our student induction. And I actually said, well, I like your ideas a whole lot better than I like ours. So what if I give you the money and give you the support, and you run the induction, and you provide a little bit of a window within that for us to do the transactional stuff that is required from an admin point of view. And they did that. And they did a lot more as well. So I'm going to, forgive me, but I'm just going to run through a few, literally almost like a slideshow of some of the things they did in their first year, just to give you a kind of flavor of what they achieved. So they started off pretty quickly with getting their own sort of branding and starting off with outreach immediately with open days. And there's nothing more effective at open days than students talking to students, in my opinion. This is an example of what they tweeted out about their schedule for the induction. I'm sure it's too small for you to see very clearly, but they did all of this. They did the organization, they divided it up into groups, and you can see some of the activities that they had. They had drones flying around. They had people zooming around in cars in one of the car parks. They had meeting the technicians. As you can see, there's a slot there from Engineers Ireland. So there's an awful lot of things that they had built into this schedule, and it was very, very efficiently organized, and a bunch of students planned it, and a larger group of students implemented it. They did company visits. They managed to get toys out of companies and develop toys of their own. They did social events and very successful formal across the entire student body. They did even more outreach, and they teamed up with the IET to do things like meet the lecturer events. This is a particularly notable one. The student holding the robot in the center of the left-hand picture, that's Joseph. Joseph was a first-year student and proposed that we had a robotics league competition between ourselves at Ulster University and our nearest colleagues at Queen's University, and we did it. So I mean, it's an amazing achievement. We got technicians to help build a maze for the robot. We had first-year students who had never really programmed in C, learning how to use an Arduino to produce a robot. And we had a very enjoyable evening. And in fact, I have to say, the first-year students at Ulster University won. And yes, that's a tweet from Noel Sharkey, a former judge of Robot Wars, and of course, a significant authority in the area. And at that event, just to give you an example of the kinds of weird things that can happen, one of those students, in fact, approached me while they were doing the competition, trying to propose changes to the curriculum. And I just don't think you would get that kind of buy-in without the kinds of activities that this took forward. It was partly to do with that kind of breakdown in hierarchy between the students and the staff. Here's more outreach that the Student Society did on behalf of the whole university. And here's charity fundraising they did in their formal activities. And then they won some prizes. And then they went to the Student Society Awards in Cardiff and won some national prizes. And more prizes and more awards, including for MJ. Now, the prizes and awards aren't really the point here. But nevertheless, that was just some of the first year the Student Society did when they got up and running. And I haven't shown things here that I think are really important in the co-curricular space. Just hearing what Kieran was saying about this challenge of fitting what we're doing in with the existing curriculum, and I entirely agree. But for example, the Society did an electronics course for mechanical engineers who weren't exposed to it as much. They ran their own revision classes, and some of the modules they found more difficult, and a whole lot more besides. So I can't even show you everything that they did in 1 year, but it gives you some kind of idea. What are the foundational principles of this? Well, this is a little diagram to try to show how I think we often interact with students as staff. And we have some colleagues that tend to regard students they're just transactional learners. They come in, we deliver the curriculum to them, they give us our money, we go home, and that's it. And the end result is hopefully you will have transacted the formal curriculum, and you might not even have done that. But there'll certainly not be much opportunity for unintended learning. I have to say by all parties here, because I mean for us as well as the students. And then there's a very famous phrase that we hear a lot, which is students as partners. And I think this is a very important idea. We start to share some of our autonomy with the students. They begin to engage in these activities. Very often, however, not always, those activities are ones we have designed and we're now getting the students to participate in or to transact. And that's helpful, I think. And it will produce a lot more unintended learning as the students go through those activities. But it's kind of the top of this triangle that I'm really interested in, and that is, where can we develop students as learners in their own, as leaders in their own right? And that's really requires us to surrender quite a lot of autonomy and to be quite generous about that. And then they'll share it back with us. But this is where students are directing, with our support, co or extracurricular activities that they have designed. So, you know, we might have to go through a phase of helping them with a few ideas to begin that, but ultimately the idea is to get to the stage that they have the ideas, we provide the money and the support, and they do it. And in my opinion, this provides the potential for maximizing the learning that happens outside the formal curriculum. So moving on to a couple of slides that MJ put together, my former PhD student who was the chair of the society in the first year, and this is a quote that he picked out. But what he's trying to say by this is, this initiative of trying to have students as leaders can make your job easier through making this kind of sustainable partnership. Again, here's some of MJ's slides about what was possible, and it just gives you similar ones to the ones you've seen before. But he went on to talk about, for example, why is this helpful? Well, it can improve retention of students because they're more engaged with us and they understand, and they're more organically engaged with us, and we see when things are going wrong. It shifts the culture in the students. Some of the students don't really understand what the staff are trying to achieve on their behalf, and this helps them with that. It gives them some management experience. It gives them experience of project-based learning. And MJ, who's a flight instructor, added this bit about no cockpit gradient. By that he means a cockpit gradient is there's usually or there can be a high level of hierarchy between the most senior and junior people in a cockpit of a plane or whatever. Here we're trying to get rid of that. We're trying to not create a sort of arbitrary hierarchy between ourselves and the students and give them the same level of autonomy as much as possible. There's things that you can't really do. You can't really get students to do things that they don't really care about. You're going to have to try to find some money for this, but that money is actually really very relatively small amounts. You can't get success without giving some staff support, in my opinion, but that staff support can't be micromanaging. You've got to give some space. So moving on to a little bit about why you might want to do this, apart from what we've said already. And this slide is actually one I used for my interview for the job I'm currently in. And here I was trying to set out what I saw as the ambition for creating virtuous circles in behaviors and environments for staff and students as to how we can develop really good leadership. And I would put it to you that this diagram is as important for us as staff members as it is for students. And I'm trying to explore here the things that I felt were important in creating virtuous circles of positive leadership styles, because it's quite easy to produce vicious circles of negative leadership styles, which I'll not go into in too much. But what we're trying to do on the right-hand side is getting folks that understand about how to set culture, how to set that strategic direction. And without the culture being right, the strategic direction is irrelevant. And the communication and challenge so that, for example, people feel empowered to say when they think things are going wrong. And there's an opportunity to do that in a polite and constructive way. Other things that you might want to consider, and I'm not going to talk about all of this slide because this is very much in some way something I wrote for my own faculty. But there's a really important thing to understand about this. These students in these initiatives will do things you will not imagine, and they will do things we cannot easily do. The other thing I really want to draw your attention to is a number of bullet points at the bottom, which are really about the benefits to the culture of your school or your university in doing this. But this point I want to make that's in bold at the bottom, I really want to sort of hammer home a bit, because when I'm trying to roll this initiative out to certain other areas, what I'm often seeing is them trying to do student facilitated things. So they're saying, well, here's an idea we've got and we want students to do it. And actually what I want to do is something much stronger, which is actually, here is something the students have elected to do, and we're going to support them in doing that. Now, that might take a bit of work to get to there, but it can be done. A little bit about the how, just very quickly. It's not just the students that need to show leadership. You're going to need staff to show leadership. And in my opinion, that's inclusive of a whole lot of different types of staff. We had academic staff, technical staff, clerical, admin staff, all working together on this. And I think that was really, really important. You can't do this by sitting on top of other people and raining on their parade. You're going to have to be quite constructive in doing that. Things will go wrong. For example, we had students wanted to make a radio frequency telescope. They asked for a bit of money. I gave them a bit of money. They didn't quite get to that outcome. They were quite upset about that. I wasn't, because I felt the process of what they had done in that journey was the important thing. And the amount of money was not huge. So it was a manageable risk. And I think that that's really important. And to do this, you're going to be asking students to do some of the things that staff would otherwise do. And in that situation, it is ethically and, of course, from a point of basic respect, important to actually pay the students for doing that. These are some slides that MJ had. I'm not going to go through them in some detail, but if you're interested in how you would start this was essentially MJ's roadmap. You needed to find somebody that would be a champion for the students, that would be able to give that time and coordination and help with a lot of the admin roles. And for a lot of people, that was a labor of love. And this is Stuart Christie, and it was a labor of love for Stuart. You need to find out who that student team are going to be, that nucleus that will start things off, and give them a bit of space to help do the recruitment. You want that team to be as diverse as possible. You want to try to find a initial project to help them circulate around. Now, you might want to give students exemplars of what you think that project could be, just so that they can open up their imagination. But fundamentally, very quickly, you want to get to the point where they're the ones saying, this is what we want to do, not what you've told us you might want us to do. And you need a mechanism for allocating funding. And in my case, I said, this is an interesting idea. Like for the induction day, I said, give me your idea on a 1 page, and we can talk about it more after that. What is it you want to do? How many students will it impact? How much money do you need? And that was it. I would just greenlight it on that basis. Or if not, I would come back and talk to them and try to work that through. You want some mechanism for being able to monitor the milestones. In my case, the Student Society produced their own report, which they actually gave to the Vice Chancellor. So they can do this as well, but give them a mechanism for doing that. The sustainability piece of making sure that once you get this up and going, it keeps up and going. For me, a lot of this is that once students have seen what is possible from a group of students that went before them, if their vision is lifted. The initial problem is students will go, well, I can't do it. It's not going to be possible. You're not going to give me the money. And then once they see all those things are not true, then it takes off. And that seems to be what's happened for us. And we're rolling this out to other groups of people now. And I have to say, within my faculty, we have lots of really successful student societies. I'm picking this one because it was the one I was most personally involved with. A little bit of just talking to the transversal skill piece, and I just sort of looked at the UNESCO domains of how they divided them. I don't tend to go into this in much detail, except to say that I hope it's obvious how this allows for critical and innovative thinking. I mean, basically what the aim here is for us to get out of the way and let the students have that critical thinking without us being in the way. The interpersonal skills, again, is a huge part of the development of this kind of these kinds of initiatives. And the interpersonal skills, again, I think are there in spades. There's 3 other domains UNESCO puts on transversal skills. I actually would argue that there's initiatives that most of our society did that would hit those, but I think your mileage will vary depending on what you're trying to do. So kind of summarizing your first steps, if you wanted to try to do this, you can see there's MJ's map at the bottom. And I'm emphasizing this student's work because it was a student-led society. But you might need to help pump prime this. You might need to give people a few ideas until they get their heads around it themselves. And then follow the steps in the previous slides. And I'm very happy to make these slides available, but whatever way is useful. And that's me. Thank you very much. Thanks to MJ, aka Dr. Jennings, my former PhD student, who was the chair of this society that I've been talking about. And thanks to all the students and staff who have worked on this very hard over the years, because it's very much a team effort. I'm just here talking about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Colin Turner. It was a very interesting speech again, and it links very much in with what some universities are doing, but it can give us some ideas and spark some ideas. Our final speaker this morning is Dr. Kevin Delaney. Kevin is a lecturer and researches in the area of design, innovation and knowledge management and engineering education in the School of Mechanical and Manufacturing Engineering at TU Dublin. In addition, Kevin works as an educational developer for Convene, a collaboration between TU Dublin, UCD Innovation Academy and enterprise partners across 7 major economic sectors. This government-funded human capital initiative project is focused on supporting the Irish higher education system to meet the challenges and needs of the enterprise. He had mentioned this earlier, and it's a HCI-funded initiative. Before that, Kevin spent 10 years in advanced development and design roles in the automotive and connector industries. And he's a chartered engineer and Fellows of Engineers Ireland and is currently the chairperson of the Academic Society. Kevin, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Anne. So what I've shown here is I've shown a selection of screenshots, basically, of the requirements for transferable skills. transversal skills. When you go out, you see that there's a huge number of groups that have defined them. And as Kieran said in his presentation, they're not clearly defined. Different people call them different names, and it can become very, very confusing. And what I'm going to look at now is I'm going to introduce a particular module that we've used to actually integrate the teaching of transversal skills into the module. It's important to note that this is just one module that the students will do. All of the students on our engineering program have to do it, but it is only one of the modules through which we try and help the students to develop these transversal skills. It's very difficult to define transversal skills. So what we've done is we've put together a list of what we think the students are going to get out of the module. And again, I'm looking very much at a micro level. This is a module level. It's not looking at, the macro level that Kieran is looking at. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the module that is the vehicle for this, I suppose. The module has been running since 2008, and I've been working on it since 2008. And it is most definitely the surfacing element that Kieran was talking about, that we've always been doing this idea of developing and integrating transversal skills. When the module was initiated, we were calling it real-world machine design. And the challenge, it's a problem-based learning module. It is a large group problem-based learning module. And we were getting the students to design assembly machines. The students were managing the entire process themselves, and the lecturers involved were working as facilitators. And I mean, the students would go along and they'd phone up companies, they'd go and visit companies. One of the images that I've shown there, and they're all student images, one of them was for a tableting plant. So they phoned up one of the local pharmaceutical companies and they went to visit that. We would pay for the buses, but they would arrange the buses. They would go along and they would contact the company. In most cases, the companies would give them lunch, and it was a great opportunity for the students to go out and visit enterprise. It was really, really successful. We had some fantastic feedback from students. We had some fantastic feedback from enterprise and industry, but we did have a problem. The problem was that students found it very difficult to accept that their designs mightn't work. They said that once we build it, it's perfect, and that's absolutely it. And it's very, very difficult for us to say, well, sorry, that model, I don't think it's going to work. Based on my industrial experience, I don't think that's an appropriate solution. So they couldn't fully test their designs, and they couldn't appreciate the complexities of actually trying to manufacture it. It became very difficult for the students to fully understand the scale of their projects. So when they go along and do a calculation, if they came up with an answer of 20 newtons or 200 newtons or 20,000 newtons, they didn't actually understand perhaps the differences between them. It also became quite difficult for the staff to assess the individual student contributions. Of course, we could watch, we could monitor, but one of the key problems that we had was we started having very large repositories of online CAD models. So essentially the module had kind of moved from design over to just glorified CAD models, and all the students had to do was to create a model that looked nice. And we felt that really wasn't enough. So we went back to basics and we said, well, how are other professions actually being educated? We went back and we looked at the teachers, the airline pilots, medical doctors, etc. And we started looking at representation of practice. How are practices of engineering represented, and how could we actually teach those practices to our engineering? And we decomposed it right back to the very basic steps that we expect the engineers to have. And then we turned around and said, well, how could we reintroduce those and approximate practice so that the students can experience the real world conditions where they're given the opportunity to engage in practices in a very similar way to what a professional engineer would. So what we decided to do was we brought in a requirement for the students that in addition to designing their products, we scaled the products back, we made them much simpler, we made the groups slightly smaller, but we expected the students to actually design and manufacture the actual products. So by doing so, we managed to make it authentic, immersive, we made it more experiential for the students. It's a year-long module. It's taken by year 3, level 8 mechanical engineering students. And the third year of our mechanical program is a little bit unusual because some of the students that come into the program have previously maybe undertaken a level 7 degree, or they've come from other universities, they're coming from Erasmus, etc. So we have quite a mix of students that's entering the program. So I'm now going to talk about how we've actually brought each of the 12 transversal skills into the module. So when the module starts off, we typically kick off just to make sure that people are using the same language. We talk about a very basic design process. And then we turn around and we give students a kind of an icebreaker or a team building challenge that they have to work on. And the team challenge is basically to design the tallest freestanding structure that they can, based on a specific limit of requirements. So we give them a certain number of pages, A4, A3 pages. We give them a couple of paper clips. Sometimes we'll give them a little piece of tape, or sometimes we'll allow them to trade some of the paper clips for more paper. And there's a few other little things that we do. The images that you see there, the one on the left was particularly high, and it was actually done with newspaper. We used to go to the library, we used to recycle the newspaper, and I suppose it gave an increased in confirmation that we're trying to be sustainable as well. But then we had a lot of complaints from students saying that, oh, the paper density that they got was worse and it wasn't a fair bunch of resources. So we're now using, albeit recycled, we are now using standard paper that comes through our photocopiers. The students find it quite funny when they see me coming in with a stepladder and an actual laser measurement device. But again, it's all part of trying to get them have a bit of fun, and it's their first session. It's to try and get them to communicate with each other. It's trying to get them to work as part of a team. But that's not it. It's not all about fun. After they've done this, we have a competition, and we basically create a wind tunnel, or the wind test, that other student groups can try to blow over the structures, so they have to be stable. But then we get the students to reflect on what they're actually doing. How could they have done better? What could they have changed in their approach to actually ensure that the next time they face a similar situation, that they wouldn't repeat the same mistake? And I suppose essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to engender within the students the idea that when you're faced with a challenge, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at, well, what happened in the past? What worked successfully in the past? What can we learn from what happened in the past? And that can be positive or indeed negative connotations. I mean, we've heard there previously that it's not all about projects working perfectly. It's about taking the learning from it. So we tried to, we literally show the students some of these images, and we tried to show them that they're all coming in with specific prior experiences. They're all going to be able to reflect on those experiences. They're going to have some new experiences through what they've actually done as part of the class. And I suppose we try to encourage them to think about reflection. Well, describe the experience. Can you actually go about, think about what were the influencing factors? What worked well? What could you have done differently? What have you actually learned as part of this? And ultimately, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help them to understand the importance of their prior experiences, to develop more experiences, and then learn from them so that it can help them in their future careers. From an actual practical module perspective, what we do is the students have this reflective session. Immediately after the reflective session, we take up all the notes that they've taken, we document them, we combine them, and when we come back the following week, we turn around and said, well, this wasn't our idea, guys, this is what you said. And we get the students, they get an opportunity to communicate through writing down. They have whiteboards, they also have to talk to each other, they have to document it, and it's all part of helping the students to develop their communication, their teamwork skills. Then they have to learn how to define the problem. These problems that we give are different every year. So we're getting them to design small robots. And we've designed all kinds of robots, robotic tugs for towing little trailers around. Ultimately, what we do is we give them an actual project brief, and then we expect the students to probe it. And typically there are some important details missing. So as they actually go through the process, they're expected to come back and say, oh, well, you never told us this. So they have to follow it. They have to use a range of manufacturing processes. They have to source all the parts. They have to follow a strict budget. They present their work at formal design reviews. And that's in addition to demonstrating ongoing progress each week. We do expect them, and I mean, engineering is often considered to be a kind of a silo approach, that you have different disciplines that don't actually work together. So what we've done is we've teamed up with the electrical engineering students who are studying a module in instrumentation. And they act as consultants to our students. So they literally come in and our students explain their problem to them, again, helping them to develop their communication skills. And the electrical engineering students then explain, well, your design is good for this reason or that reason. And literally the electrical engineering students are working as consultants. We've been doing that with Dr. Gavin Duffy since 2019. They typically have 2 formal meetings a year. They have multiple informal sessions, and then they have some formal reporting sessions as well. And it's part of the overall learning to communicate, learning to work cross-discipline. That's very important for our students. The students have a set budget, and we're quite strict in terms of the budget. We change it every year. We go through what we think is appropriate based on the particular project at hand. The students need to source and order all components themselves. When they're doing their pricing, they need to put in the open market selling price. So if you turn around and some of their parents are running shops, they can't actually artificially benefit from that. The stock materials in the university are considered free of charge, but their value must be estimated. So the students have to understand, well, what's the density of the material? How can we actually go along and put an estimated value on this? The cost versus delivery lead times can be quite a shock to the students. Sometimes they think that if you order something today, that it's going to arrive tomorrow, but then they'll discover that if you buy it from Hong Kong, they might be able to save €4, but it might take an extra 3 or 4 weeks to get there. So it's to learn all of those balances and to understand the commercial implications of some of the decisions that they're actually taking. I suppose it is a design module, so the students have to develop their reasoning, they have to develop their problem-solving skills. When they create a particular design, they might go along and simulate the model, but then they have to turn it into reality. They have to be able to understand where are the problems, how can you actually solve those problems, and who do you turn to for help? They have to fabricate all the parts, and they have to debug the design as they go through it. There are multiple teams doing this. They're all working to the same overall brief, but we do try and make sure that there's some commonality between the different teams. Typically, they're robots that we do it in 2 different parts. So they might have, if it's going to be towing a trailer, for example, we expect that the hitch dimensions are the same because it has to be able to interface with the trailer that we have built separately. There can be attachment positions. I mean, we had a firefighting robot a few years ago where it had a tank of water on the back. It had an arm that would actually raise to a particular angle, and then it would pump the water over a barrier. And again, the students have to negotiate with themselves, and they have to come back and tell us, this is going to be the interface components. And it's amazing how a very, very simple challenge can become incredibly complex when you have 20 different people trying to negotiate. But again, it's all part of the learning. They need to work with the groups, and they need to define those common elements. They have to manage themselves. We give them a macro schedule for each semester, somewhat similar to what you're looking at there. They have to manage their own time. If they're going to go on holidays and go skiing to Andorra, that's fine, but it's important that they put it in as part of their overall schedule. If they have other assignments, and remember, this is just one module that I'm talking about here. So if there's other assignments that they have to be able to take that on board, and they have to be able to ensure that their schedule is still realistic. The work of all the team members has to be coordinated. Weekly meetings are held. They have to set appropriate agendas. They have to have meeting minutes. They have to have action lists that are coming out from that. And again, it's all part of learning how are they going to operate when they do eventually go out and work in industry. Most groups assign a project manager. We've had some varied experiences with this. We have a very hands-off approach. So sometimes the students will assign, I won't use the word class clown, but they basically decide that they're going to have somebody assigned as the project manager who may be totally inappropriate for the role. And they think that I'm going to worry and have an input or a comment on that. I don't. I say no problem. And the funny thing is, there have been several groups over the years where after 3 or 4 weeks of maybe the student not turning up, they're fired, literally kicked out of the team, or they're certainly given a stern warning to make sure that they're not going to continue in that vein anymore. Students have to learn to deal with conflict. And again, there's no point in putting your head in the sand. We have to turn around and say there will be conflict. Almost every year, I think 1 or 2 teams will have challenges. As facilitators on the module, we have to accept it. We have to be a calming agent, and we have to say, okay, let's try and separate the person from the problem here. You don't like the actions of this particular person or the particular, you don't like specific elements of what this person is doing. It's not that you don't like the person. They have to try and take ownership. Sometimes what will happen is people will say, oh, well, this person didn't do something. And then you'll find that they were reliant on other students in the team to actually have some input. And one person gets the blame, but it's not really their fault. It's because the other people feeding into that may have been delayed or may have, failed to complete what they had to fail. Oh, sorry, what they were expected to complete. You have to focus on the future, confidentiality, of course, and there's some other elements as well. But I think the point is that we're trying to help the students to develop some coping mechanisms so that they can deal with conflict. We want the students to be adaptable. We want them to be resilient. And I mean, I spend a lot of my time working with enterprise, going out, talking to companies, and they're saying, oh, we need our students to be more resilient. We need them to have a higher level of stress. We need them to be able to deal with issues as and when they arise. So what we've done is at the end of semester 1, we typically have a pivot. And that can be, typically we'll come up with some kind of a press release like this to say, hey, the company's been taken over. Our robot making division has been sold and it's now got a change of personnel. We're going to have a restructuring and we change the team around. Sometimes we change the staff, not necessarily by delivery, but deliberately in terms of the staff. Sometimes we have to in terms of, the way things work out. Sometimes groups will change due to people going in Erasmus. Sometimes you'll have some scope creep. So last year, for example, I put in a requirement that the students would actually go along and minimize the power requirement. So halfway through the semester, we told them, oh, by the way, you have to redesign your circuit to actually monitor the amount of power that you're using. And you also have to develop the ability to take a photograph as the machine is traveling through the pipe. They designed a small pipe crawling robot last year, 125 millimeter diameter pipe, an acrylic pipe, and the students had to be able to drive their robots through it. And it was pretty funny to actually take photographs of people as they were actually driving through the clear pipe. Of course, we're trying to help our students as well, and it's not just about one module. It's trying to help them in terms of their overall career. And I suppose this is just an image to show how, and it's to make it explicit to our students, how their experiences can be built up during a course of several different years. We have to help them. We owe it to our students to help them develop their informal learning. The hope is that by exposing the students to some theory behind this, that it'll actually help them to understand the need to actively manage their career, to help them essentially be more effective engineers when they enter industry. The benefits achievable by learning from past experiences, they've been repeatedly mentioned, but it's important to note there is some risk of hindsight bias as well that you have to be cognizant of as you're going through it. It is noted reflective practice. It's a crucial part of developing new skills as an engineer, but it's also much more fundamental, and this is not specific to engineering at all. This is important for people to be able to develop more capacity as an individual, to help them to be able to respond more effectively to changes, make more timely decisions, to try and manage emotions and cope with stress. And now I'm going to show you some of the projects that we've done. So this is our fleet of vehicles, if you like, over the last several years. Started off with a relatively large Jenga block dispenser. Then we had a little lifter that would carry loads from one place to another. We had the fire tender. During COVID, we scaled up. It was just online, so we didn't actually build anything that year, but we did get the students to go to a much higher level of simulation, and in terms of almost moving towards a practical digital twin. 2 years ago, we had a trailer, a little tug and a trailer, and we built a trailer out of a skateboard, and we put some weights on it. The students would buy it and or would build it, and then they had to be able to perform some maneuvers like figures of 8 and so on. Last year then we had the pipe crawling robot, and you can see some examples there. We have different tests. We had a standalone evaluation of the vehicles on their own. We had them driving through a linear pipe, and then we had them driving through a linear pipe with a 45-degree bend on it. And obviously the whole frictional effects, and it's teaching the students the importance of friction and torque, etc., on their devices. The real challenge with that particular project was the packaging of it, because the pipe we got was a smaller diameter than we were initially told we could get. So the students had, again, to help them with their resilience, they had a few extra stresses to deal with. In conclusion, work is ongoing with a new project for 2023-24. We do have a bit of a pivot plan for semester 2, but I won't go into that at the moment. There's disruption. And I mean, the students have to be able to deal with that. Last week, we had a shutdown of the university. We had issues in terms of storms a few weeks ago. They have to be able to deal with these little issues. And oh, it's terrible. My entire project is going to fall apart because I couldn't get access to a workshop for 20 minutes. Those type of things the students have to deal with, and their project management has to be able to accommodate such changes. We're continually refining and modifying the module, and supported by the Enterprise Academy, we're working now to consider the impact analysis. So we're doing a longitudinal analysis to understand, are we really making a difference for our stakeholders? And again, how can we change and modify the project appropriately? Kieran mentioned the idea of trying to have an ability to certify transversal skills. Just to let you know, within TU Dublin, we do have a little program available. It's called Stellar, and it's basically specifically designed to try and record the students' transformative learning and to display their improved soft skills to potential employers. So if anybody is interested in finding out a little bit more, you can contact some of my colleagues there on the Stellar organization within TU Dublin. From an acknowledgements perspective, we'd like to acknowledge some funding that's been made available through our faculty and also through the Enterprise Academy. But more importantly, I would like to thank all the staff. It was mentioned there previously that there's a lot of people that are involved when you try to do a project like this. It's amazing, even to make sure that the students get the money back for the parts that they purchase. There's a huge amount of work needed. More importantly, or most importantly, I would like to thank all the students that have taken the module. Some of them are now back delivering the module. And I'd also like to thank the industry partners who have advised us on its development. Thank you very much. I'll stop my presentation there.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That's our final speaker now for this morning. Before we open up the Q&A, I would just like to say there was a variety of approaches to introducing the transversal skills, from the specific in certain modules and working with students, as in the University of Ulster, to the more generic approach that DCU are taking, where there's no specific module, but it's embedded in them all in a generic way, and they're applicable to all disciplines, not just engineering. So it's an interesting approach there, and I hope it generated lots of ideas for people. Anyway, just moving over to the questions. First one in the Q&A is from, is there a way to assess the success of integration? I think it's kind of been answered, but maybe Kieran or Kevin, you'd like to take that? Kieran first, maybe.
Sure, thanks. Hansan. So, I mean, ultimately, you have to, once you've defined your transversal skills, you have to operationalize them according to competence statements. So essentially, the success of the integration, will be determined by the fact that the competence statements become formal learning outcomes on any given module or modules. And if they're a formal learning outcome on a module, then they have to be assessed. And then I suppose once they're assessed, you can then look at the quality or the level of impact that a given teaching approach has. If, for example, like students are really struggling to do well on the given assessments, whatever the assessments are, then it may raise a question around, okay, is there a better way to do that? Is there a better way to cultivate these this competence or competences within the given module. So I think ultimately what has to happen is that, you know, the competence statements become formal learning outcomes on a module, and then the heavy lifting has to happen around what is the optimum or good practice examples of developing this competence within a formal learning environment and assessing it. And that's something that, you know, a lot of academics really struggle with, including myself, by the way, I should hasten to add, because a lot of us don't have, while we have discipline expertise, we don't necessarily have formal qualifications in teaching and learning, like a lot of primary and secondary school teachers have. So I think this is one of the kind of oxymorons or tensions at the heart of academia. And we're under pressure to produce research outputs, but also then to upskill in our teaching and learning. But fundamentally, it is around these competence statements being formal learning outcomes on modules.
Kevin, would you like to add anything to that?
I suppose I would add just that different students are going to get different results out of this kind of a module. So for example, one student might volunteer to become project manager, and they will have come out with a whole different list of experiences, or a different set of experiences than somebody that doesn't. And even if two students in two separate groups become project managers, what they actually put into it will vary as well. It becomes very, very difficult to specifically state, yes, you're over a threshold level. And I suppose it's like, even in terms of our own work as educators, how would you actually rate yourself? Are you effective in terms of your communication? How effective are you? And it becomes a very, very difficult question to answer. So I can understand the complexity of where the question is actually coming from. I don't have an easy answer, but I do very much subscribe to the idea that in a typical program, you have a lot of modules, and it is important to try and encourage people to take different roles in different modules. If you have the same person always taking the project management / leadership across 3 years of a program and multiple modules, you could end up with some other people not developing those skills. And, you know, of course, you can put down in a module descriptor, you can put down a learning outcome to say, yes, please have, you know, to be able to communicate effectively. But the level of where that communication effectively should be is very, very difficult to quantify.
Yeah, thank you for that. A question here for Colin. From experience, what percentage of students are not willing or ready to engage or drive student-led activities? And I have a related question to follow on from that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There's actually a very high proportion of students got involved with the initiative, but you will always get some who are more assertive in wanting to drive forward and be part of in this case, a committee. In terms of the leadership, other people might lead specific events, but actually, the society that I showed a case study of here, they did manage to sign up pretty much the entire first year, that year that they started going. And part of the reason was that rather than it being me, for example, I did a very short formal welcome, but I basically passed straight over to one of the student society people so that the students could be welcomed by one of their peers. And I think that really had a huge impact in terms of that kind of feeling of inclusivity. So it was actually a very high proportion of students did get involved in one way or another.
Okay, and so what happens if they just don't want to? I suppose they don't get those skills and they're not as likely to get employed. I suppose they lose out in the long run, I suppose.
That's true. I mean, there's no coercion involved in this. So there is a bit of self-selection. But nevertheless, you do tend to get a bit of a momentum going where more students bring in more students. One of the things that's possibly implicit in the question is we were quite careful to try to avoid cliquishness and make sure that when we were funding things, it wasn't necessarily just for folks who were members of this or that. It was to try to make sure we had, you know, impact across all the student body.
I have another question for you, Colin, there. It's paying the students would require multiple layers of red tape on top of teaching timetable of 16 plus hours per week. So how is it feasible to pay them? And does UUJ have some easy channel created to support this approach?
Well, first of all, I'm very sensitive to the teaching timetable challenge, and partly this is one of the goals of this, which is to try to ease workload by having it as a more of a shared issue. At least in our case, we have mechanisms for paying usually doctoral students for demonstrating and for assisting with those sorts of activities. I simply rolled those out to the undergraduate students, so it wasn't particularly complicated at all, and it's just ethically the correct thing to do.
Yeah, I suppose in DCU we have a mechanism for paying for final year projects. So they have a budget, and if they need to buy equipment, we have set up a system where they have a person, they're assigned a person to help them get through that bureaucracy, and it seems to work quite well.
No, I was a head of school at the time, and you know, I had admin support at the time, and most of it came through the school office, and the sums of money were not huge. They're very proportionate.
Yeah. I have another question here about, I don't know which of you would like to answer this. In relation to the student-led initiatives, apart from those directly involved in the construction and delivery of these initiatives, how many of the other students participated in the organised events apart from the social ones? How was this monitored? And was there any conversation with those who did not participate? It's kind of a related question to the previous one, but maybe someone else would like to give an answer to that one. Kevin or Kieran? How do you monitor their participation? That they might say, I think you've kind of answered it with the learning outcomes, but it's a bit tricky. I think we're trying to figure that out in DCU at the moment, how to embed these transversal skills into the learning outcomes of a module. So, and you can, as you said at the start, Kieran, you're going to be individual transcript.
I think that particular question is probably relates to the trying to use extracurricular activities to develop those skills. And I mean, we would have various extracurricular initiatives as well in terms of enterprise challenges, in terms of, you know, hackathon style events. But again, the students typically self-select to join that. So from that perspective, you know, you don't have every student joining. You only have the people that are actually more engaged and enthusiastic about doing it. And I suppose that's the challenge with this, because if you expect every student to develop skills in that way, then it can't be extracurricular. And I think Kieran made that very clear in his presentation, that if you do that, you won't have all students engaging in it.
Yeah, I think, I mean, ideally you want the kind of balance between, as Majella was talking, it's very important that a student, when they're going for a job or in a job, you know, that they have the ability to articulate what their skills are, what they can do, to use examples, etc. And equally, no university or learning institution can capture everything that a student does outside their work. They could be volunteering, they could be leading sports teams, they could be interning in San Francisco for the student, somewhere in a creative thinking agency. We don't know what they get up to. So it's important that they have the ability to self-report and provide examples to support their self-reporting, instead of just rhapsodizing about themselves and saying they're amazing and everything, that they have to support it with examples. But then also that within the program structures, there's some mechanism for the program to say, look, we prioritize X number of transversal skills, and we do formally assess X number of transversal skills. It might be all the transversal skills, and certainly we're doing that in DCU. We have 17 in total, but we're not asking every program to formally assess all 17, because that is unrealistic, even though I was too ambitious at the start. So it's been a learning curve for me, for sure. But you want that combination between the self-reporting piece and the formal assessment piece within the program structures.
Great, thank you.
Can I just add there as well, like that, these are young adults we're talking about, and some not so young adults, they're mature students. And I think it's unfair of employers to expect that you're going to grade them on every aspect of their learning. But it's also inappropriate to expect that all transversal skills will be graded. Because it is about volunteering to do things. It is about looking at those learnings that you can only get in the home, or through scouting, or being on a soccer team, or whatever it is. So, like, I think one of the things that academia needs to do is occasionally remind the students that this isn't just about getting excellent exam results. It's about getting excellent exam results and growing in all these transversal areas as well. Because that's actually what work life is about as well. It's about delivering the particular results you've been asked to do, but not alienating all your colleagues or your customers or whatever in the process. So we have to treat them as adults. And yes, I love some of the things I was hearing from Kevin and Kieran about what you can do within their learning and helping them to learn how to learn these. But I think like the stuff Colin was talking about, yeah, you have to volunteer to do that. That's extra time. And yes, some people can't volunteer for the society because they're having to work 15 hours a week to in a shop to pay for their accommodation, whatever. They need to know about these skills and how they'll be able to demonstrate that those 15 hours a week in the shop was raising these skills. So so I'm just saying, like, it has to be more than what they're learning and being marked on for this to really be effective.
Actually, I was going to ask you that question, Majella. What was your view on the approaches taken by the three speakers there, and how you think it would address your needs in an industry? And you've kind of answered it there.
Yeah, I do think they all address it, but one of the big things, you know, is actually, and it's been mentioned, like, so Kevin has kind of built in that bit of reflection, and Kieran talked about it as well. But I really think that piece of helping them to realize they're not just going for a diploma of whatever sort, that they're also trying to build these other capabilities, and they need to reflect on all that consequential or accidental learning, I think was a phrase somebody used as well. Like just letting them know that that's important, because it's too late when they start looking at the jobs market and discover that your projected results got you the interview, but it's all the stuff outside of that actually gets you the job, you know. It's very late to learn that in fourth year and realize, oh, I should have been doing some volunteering. I should have kept up my involvement in the local GAA club or whatever. And sometimes it's telling them, remember to use those examples, tell those stories as well, because they have been doing those things, and they don't bring them out.
Yeah, that's a very true point. There's a few more questions. There's one more question I want to come back to in the end, but I'll just question here about getting proof of attending the webinar and all of that. That'll be done through Engineers Ireland. You'll get Maureen here is on the line, and also the slides and the recording will be made available to attendees following the webinar. So just in relation to other questions we're following on from our discussion there, we're coming up to 11 o'clock, but if you're happy to stay on, we have a few more questions here that are very interesting. Is there as a danger that we will transactionalize the student growth? Are transversal skills by nature unsuitable for assessment?
That's a great question.
Yeah,
that's a great question. I think yeah, it's such a good question. I think again, if we look around the world, as I was saying, a lot of the issues that exist within the world stem from a lack of transversal skills, a lack of creative thinking, a lack of critical thinking, etc. And so the logic then would say that, okay, well, then we need more creative thinking, we need more leadership, we need more ethical decision making in the world. And as educators, we're in a position of privilege that we have the opportunity to reflect upon how we might actually do that. And that involves then looking, okay, so what exactly does, an ethical decision maker, what can they actually do? And then how can we develop approaches to teaching, or even, I'm not even sure teaching is the correct term, to cultivate, to develop, to foster these transversal skills that are really useful. And then the only way we can tell, or perhaps the only way we can tell if these interventions, these modalities are really useful, is through feedback with the students, but also through assessment. And And so if we need more of these things, we need to figure out how we can develop them. And as I said, one way to do that is to assess the students, to get feedback from them as well. So, but it is a big ask. Some of these things, like some of them, and I definitely think we can use the affordances of AI to help us assess some of these things. For example, divergent thinking would be one of the competence statements around creative thinking, the ability to generate lots and lots of different novel ideas. And we can definitely use AI to assess divergent thinking in a far, far more efficient way than humans could do, for sure. So AI automation can help us on certain things. But things like, you know, personal agility, they're extreme. Like if, for example, you say that self-compassion is a component of personal agility, you know, you can certainly, there's courses on self-compassion. Assessing self-compassion, that's a difficult thing to do. That's a very difficult thing to do. So, like I said, and we ran a conference in September, and you know, my closing kind of remarks with that is like, if you think you're doing transversal skills and they're easy, you're not doing them right. You know, I wish it was, but some of these things are really hard to do. Others are more straightforward. I think project management, which is incredibly valuable, but there's more literature and a structure and infrastructure around it. But some of them, the really slippy ones, there's a big challenge around them.
Okay, great. There's a question here, form of assessment for TC skills international. Is there an international template available? I think, Kevin, you mentioned you have
yeah,
something.
there's a stellar certification that's certainly we're using in our Blanchardstown campus, and we're rolling it out across the university at the moment.
I don't know if there's anything else available. Colin, is there anything up in UUJ?
I mean, I was struck listening to a lot of these conversations that they seem to be very similar to what in the UK HE went through when they tried to do the Higher Education Achievement Report, which is partly about formal learning, but also partly about that kind of extra and co-curricular learning and how it's evidenced. So I don't know if it's valuable to have a look at some of the things that went well with here and some things that didn't. It's not a statutory requirement, but a lot of UK universities do it. And it's kind of wrapped up into the whole personal development planning work that was done by a lot of colleagues, including by Norman Jackson. I mean, I only mention that because I know a lot of the issues we're talking about, I think, have been wrestled with in those settings. And I don't know if it might be useful to have a look at some of what has worked and not worked in those settings, because a lot of things haven't worked. I mean, I think particularly Kieran's previous comments, I agree with completely. There's some things is very difficult to evidence directly. They're not really, you know, evidenceable learning outcomes, but there's lots of other ways where universities have come up with ways to evidence some of this kind of co-curricular, extracurricular work that probably fits into this space.
Yeah, thanks very much. And that's the end of the questions in the Q&A. Some of them have been answered by typed answers rather than orally, verbally online. So I hope everyone can see those, the questions that have been answered by the individual speaker. So if there's any other outstanding questions, we'll close the webinar for now. And I'd like to thank all our speakers for their very interesting talks, for their insights, and hopefully there's lots of thought for people to use in their own teaching going forward.